this leads us to the discussion of belief and disbelief, right? So in philosophy of religion, we can talk about the various claims that a religion makes, but we can also talk about what people believe. And there are a lot of terms that are used when discussing religious belief that are misunderstood or used in synonymous ways when they actually mean different things. And so we're just going to clarify what these terms actually mean and how we're going to be using them in this class. So the term many people might be familiar with is that of a theist, right? So a theist is someone who believes in God, but you'll notice that there can be different pre-qualifiers, right, that we can put on here. So you could be a monotheist, you could be a polytheist, right? There are different types of theism, but the idea here is that a theist is someone who has a positive belief, right? They believe in the existence of at least one divine entity. Right? And so this type of theism, right, is going to be the personal belief in God. So a theist is relating to the person. The ism here is relating to the belief. On the other end of a theist is an atheist, right? So when we have the A in front of a word, it typically is involving a negation or denial of, right? So if theism is the belief in the existence of God, then an atheist is someone who denies the existence of God. So it's important to understand that both theism and atheism, right, are beliefs, right? They are commitments to an existential claim, either a positive or a negative. Now, the next term that I'm going to introduce is one that often gets confused with atheist, but is in fact entirely different, and that is the term agnostic. So if we think of beliefs more in the sense of a spectrum, as we should, because no one believes anything 100% or 0%, right? Belief, like most things, comes in degrees. Then we should understand theism to be at one end of the spectrum, atheism to be at the other end of the spectrum, and agnosticism to lie in the center, meaning that to be agnostic is to either withhold judgment entirely, right? So for instance, you could say, well, I just don't have enough information yet to decide whether or not I believe in God. So you could just be withholding your judgment for the time being. Or you could simply be of the opinion that this is something we cannot know, right? So you are sort of committed to remaining an agnostic, no, despite whatever information you encounter, because you happen to believe that knowing God's existence is simply beyond our human understanding, right? Maybe it's just something that is too broad or infinite or complex an idea to ever be capable of comprehending by the human mind, right? So we want to understand beliefs not as an all or nothing, right? So very few people are just entirely theists or entirely atheists, right? Most people lie somewhere in the middle of the spectrum, and it's important to understand also that those beliefs can change, not only over time, but even, from day to day, right? So someone who maybe is leaning more towards theism might be having, experiencing some extreme hardships, and so their confidence level in their theism might go down, right? And they might be sliding closer to agnosticism, or it could work the other way around, right? So just understand this as a spectrum of beliefs of which we move along, and that agnosticism lies in the central as a neutral belief. Other ways of understanding agnosticism comes from the idea of Richard Dawkins, who was a very famous philosopher of religion, and he gives us a little bit more of a series of terms that we could use if we wanted to capture perhaps where we are on this spectrum. And so this is a scale which involves notions like strong or weak adherence to theism or atheism, de facto, right, theist or de facto atheist, which involves, again, either a commitment, in this case, to not knowing, and then pure agnosticism in the middle. So feel free to take a look at these links if you want to know more about this specific terminology, but you could also just use that general sliding scale with those three terms. All right, so going into the different types of theism, right? So when we add a qualifier to the beginning, right, mono, right? Mono means one, so monotheism is the belief in one God. But specifically, and this is something that's not always captured in our understanding of monotheism, is that monotheism is the belief in a personal God, right? This is going to be an important distinction from another term that's going to come up known as deism. Deism is the belief in a God, but one that is impersonal, or who is not involved in our everyday affairs. So monotheism is not just a belief in one God, but the belief in a personal God, one that you can communicate with, right, theoretically, given perhaps certain rituals or procedures, one that is you could have a relationship with, right, one that is also likely to interrupt or become involved in human affairs, perhaps through the performance of miracles or something like this, right? So monotheism is not just the belief in one God, but the belief in a personal God. Whereas polytheism, right, poly meaning many, is the belief in many gods. Now, one of the interesting things about the polytheistic religions that we're going to look at, we'll come across them primarily in Hinduism, later forms of Buddhism, right, which merged with other indigenous traditions in the East, as well as First Nations or indigenous religions in the West, is that polytheism comes in many different types of forms, right, and means lots of different things.